Hi, I'm Dr. Alison Kole, sleep medicine specialist and bona fide chronic insomniac. Welcome to the Sleep is My Waking Passion podcast. Remember, knowledge is empowerment, and if applied correctly, it can help you biohack your way to a better night of sleep, just like I did. If this resonates with you, please follow me on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Hello, and welcome to the Sleep is My Waking Passion podcast. Today I have with me, I'm going to call him a new acquaintance friend, someone who I met through my connections with the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. We're both advocacy committee volunteers. It's Dr. Pedram Nevab. So welcome. It's so nice to have you here.
Well, thanks for having me, Allison.
So Pedram, we really didn't get a chance to talk much when we were together on Hill Day. I had actually taped an episode where I was talking to Karen Johnson about saving standard time. So that was really the focus for anyone who's listening of our Hill Day excursion with the American Academy of Sleep Medicine.
Sure.
But I had no idea that just having you be on the committee, and we're really focused on what our task is as a committee member. And then I have an author in my midst. I mean, my mind is blown. So I got up to chapter or case 9, I guess. I'm going to call it chapter 9, but case 9 of your book. I started off by downloading your book and asking you to be on the show, specifically because I'm like, this is a guy who, really kind of understands the difficulties with sleep. And I wanted to talk about over-the-counter supplements. And we are going to get to that. That's really the focus of the show today. But I couldn't help myself because once I did an audiobook. So once I started listening to your book, my mind was blown. Like, you as a sleep physician have taught me as a sleep physician how to be a better physician. I just want to give you props for that.
Oh, I'm happy about that.
Really, truly.
All right, that's great.
So I'm going to kind of focus on your book for the start of this because I think it really ties in. You do mention specifically melatonin a lot in your book, which I think has some utility, but probably is significantly overutilized in this country, and we'll get to that. So one of the starting remarks in your book was, when I let go of what I am, I become what I might be, from Lao Tzu. And this metamorphosis into what I even decided to do with my career, kind of leaving more of a traditional model, I wanted to get a sense of like where that quote came from for you, how you, for lack of a better term, sort of became enlightened over time, and how you shifted from, yes, I'm seeing patients at the bedside, to becoming an author and wanting to capture a bigger audience.
That quote is great for everyday living, for going to sleep. For example, for people with insomnia, one of the critical factors is they can't let go. They're focused on the day to day, they're ruminating. I mean, their mind is just filled with things that they have to do. And Lao Tzu's quote is great because you need to let go in order to sleep. I mean, that's one of the ways that sleep comes on. It's a natural process to kind of think about it, and to ruminate about it is going to be counterintuitive or not productive. So you just got to let go. In life, too, if you want to try something, I don't think it really helps to focus too much on it. You sometimes have to just let go and do what you want to do. Kind of like what you've done, Allison, and kind of what I've been doing for a while. Just kind of trying different things out, seeing if it works, if it doesn't work. And I think that quote is great. Anyone can be whoever they want to be, and you can achieve a variety of different things if you just set your mind to it and you have a positive outlook towards it. So I think that quote is very relevant to not only sleep or insomnia, but to everything else.
Yeah, my take on it, it was interesting because I got the relevance to sleep, but when I read it, what resonated with me was the notion that if you create these sort of like this sort of cookie cutter or box thinking about how life should be, how your sleep should be, and it's just in the sense of your singular experience. If you can get beyond that and sort of imagine outside of the box, that which you think you cannot do is attainable now. Classically perfect for insomnia, right? If you think you can't achieve sleep, it's going to be that much further away. But if you open your mind to that possibility, it will happen 100%. So, have you been an author for a long time?
I was an English major and I went to grad school for English. And I started off writing medical thrillers. I've written three so far. One was nominated for a Pushcart Prize, the other made the finalist for the Forward Indies Book Awards. So I've been writing fiction, medical thrillers, psychological thrillers. This is my first foray into nonfiction, but as you can see from the book, there is a little fictional element to it. I am talking about patients that I've seen, but they are fictionalized to some extent. So that's where you see kind of this book being as a hybrid of fiction, nonfiction. But I think the stories really resonate, and you tend to remember the principles precisely because of the stories, right? You're able to kind of categorize who Laura is, who Ava is, and where their sleep issues come from. And you can sort of look at that particular model. And a lot of the readers have told me that they identify with one of the characters in the book, which is very good because they can kind of follow the suggestions that I've made to those particular patients.
Because as you also astutely pointed out in your book, poor sleep definitely does not discriminate. It doesn't matter if you're young or old or rich or poor or women and men. Now, there's some statistics around this. Women tend to have a little bit more of a sleep issue than men. Folks that are poorer tend to sleep a little bit worse and maybe use more supplements as a result. And whites actually, which I thought was kind of interesting, kind of outweigh the non-whites in terms of that statistic, but we all can be affected at some point in our life. So understanding that we're not alone, I think, can offer some comfort. And I do think that the way you wrote your book, because you can kind of get and relate to a particular character, if that applies to you, that really teaches you that you're not alone, and you emphasize that. So, thank you for doing that.
Sure. And I think one of the reasons that I did the stories was a lot of the times insomniacs come into my office and they think they're alone in this kind of journey to wanting to sleep. And to surround yourself with people who also have issues with
Mhm.
being unable to fall asleep makes them feel better. They're like, okay, I am not alone in this. And that creates a sort of camaraderie between them. And that also tells them that someone else is experiencing it and they're not alone. And I think that helps immensely, especially with cognitive behavioral therapy. At the facility that I am, we have groups of people get together for the CBTI. We do individual therapy, we also do group therapy. So that does help with regard to the group therapy.
Are you allowed to talk about which organization you're associated with?
It's one of the major hospitals in Orange County. It's a good facility. People have responded really well to it, but I also do individual therapy myself as a concierge specialist and also in the hospital.
Yeah, I did notice that you had mentioned some very specific therapies that not many sleep physicians know a whole lot about. Now, did you do your sleep training over at Stanford, if I read correctly?
I did.
Yeah.
Probably what, 17 years ago?
Did they teach you some of these nuanced therapies that you mention in your book?
Yeah, so you're probably talking about like dream rehearsal therapy and visualization, as well as cognitive restructuring. And those are probably the strongest, also with the sleep restriction. But cognitive restructuring is great because patients often think that something terrible will happen if they don't get enough sleep, right? They'll lose their job, they'll get into a car accident, the relationship will kind of break off. And what you want to do is to tell them statistically this hasn't happened before, and so they're blowing this out of proportion. And so that's where I think the cognitive restructuring works very well. And yes, I was trained in that at Stanford. We actually, as fellows, we had to undergo a 6-week cognitive behavioral therapy ourselves to learn how to teach this to patients, which was great. I'm so happy I did that. That was part of the requirement of the fellowship, which a lot of fellowships don't have.
I can honestly say that our fellowship was great. We had Jennifer Martin
Oh, right.
over at the VA, so you know, because she's the president of the ASM.
Yeah,
So she's been a mentor of mine for a number of years.
right.
I know what you're talking about when you talk about putting a group of people together and that kind of bond that forms and that ability to sort of share your own experience and how beneficial that could be.
Yeah.
But we didn't quite go that deep. So I have to admit, like, that's some of the stuff I took away from your book. I was like, oh man, I know I can learn this.
Oh, good.
It really just opened my eyes. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And the book is really written for patients and for clinicians. I mean, both can utilize it.
Hmm.
You can teach the patients can try to learn from the book themselves, although they need a little bit of guidance from the sleep physicians. But I kind of wrote the book so that it pertains both to the patients and to the clinician.
And I want to finish up talking about your book before we get into the meat and potatoes of some other stuff
Sure.
by mentioning the last part that really resonated with me, which is the focus on having a philosophy of sleep, which I would argue is also a philosophy of life, which is that sense of optimism, because it's the optimism that you mentioned gives you that hopefulness. And if you really feel hopeful, that provides you with some semblance of a sense of control of your life. And if you feel in control, you have the power. You have the power to change your sleep. You have the power to move forward. So that's awesome. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yes, I completely agree with that statement because with insomnia, patients feel like they have no control. That's why it kind of unravels when they can't get enough sleep. As you know, the frontal lobe is affected, so they can't think straight. And so they catastrophize and they think about everything and it becomes illogical. But when you kind of have control over your sleep, that also carries over to your life. And so much of sleep is about routine. And you got to get that routine down to get a sense of control. And so that's what I think is really important about sleep and life to kind of be organized in a way, which will help with a lot of different things. I mean, organization is sort of key to insomnia, but also to your life as well, right? I mean, if you put things into perspective and you basically think about what's important in life, like relationships or work or whatnot, and you kind of look at that a little bit more logically, I think everything also falls into place. But sleep is also a component of that because you really have to get into a routine with sleep. We want you to wake up at the same time. We want you to go outside, get sun, want you to try to go to bed at the same time. Although that's a little bit more falling asleep is kind of out of your control, but that routine really helps not only with sleep but with your waking life as well. So, I think that's super important.
Yeah. So, summary, cognitive behavioral therapy is where it's at. You're going to stick some other therapies in there. Guys, check out Sleep Reimagine. That book is amazing. Okay. And I haven't even gotten through all of it, dude.
Thank
I have
you.
not even gotten all of it, but I'm like, I'm learning so much already. When I go work out, you're going to be the guy I'm listening to.
And I gotta say, Pete Cook, who narrates the book, he's an Audie Award winner. He's gotten multiple awards for different books. I think like Moby Dick, some really classics, and his voice is very soothing, as you know. So he's a great person to have narrated this book. So I'm very happy that they selected him. I had a list of people, kind of a short list, and I gave my recommendations, and I'm thankful that they went with my recommendation.
Absolutely. And I will say that he's soothing, but he's not boring because that's important too. I mean,
He's not boring, right?
but he's not going to be so exciting that he'll keep you up, put you that way. So if
Right.
you're thinking about sleep and really worried about it, this could be something that you're either exercising and listening to it in your car, or even if you're just relaxing, you never know. You might have to go back and review a chapter again. Okay, so moving on. So I wanted to focus. I mean, there are a lot of over the counter supplements. And for my listeners, you guys know that I have a friend, Valerie Cacho, Dr. Val, and she's got a website called sleepforia.com. She really takes a slightly deeper dive and has some links in there. It's a totally free website. Just go. You can learn about valerian root, you can learn about chamomile and some of these other supplements. But today I really wanted to focus on two biggies that I think I get a lot of questions about. And I'm sure, Pedram, I'm sure you get a lot of questions about this too. And that basically are the two major over the counter supplements, which are melatonin and antihistamines. I'll start with melatonin. And the bottom line is that there are a not insignificant number of the population that takes these over the counter supplements. And it tends to be more frequent in age groups where you sleep more poorly, which is classically the elderly, right? And people have been polled about this, and 75% of Americans say, you know what, I kind of want to get off these over the counter supplements. But the flip side is, have you ever had this patient where they're coming to your office and they're like, I've tried everything, but I would never go with a prescription. I'm just going to go to the local drugstore and I'm going to get something. And I just pop Benadryls like they're Tic Tacs to try to go to sleep. I don't have a prescription. And it's almost like the prescription is bad and the over the counter is good. And I disagree with that statement. And so I wanted to kind of get your take on it. Has that been your experience too?
Yeah, so I'm currently a fellow in integrative medicine at the University of Arizona. It's a 2-year program with Dr. Weil, Andrew Weil, who's kind of the guru of integrative medicine. So we've been learning a lot about herbals, vitamins for sleep. So I'll go over that as well because I think patients will really benefit from that. But regarding melatonin, the book suggests that there are some side effects from melatonin. Some people feel groggy, but I really do think that has to do with the dosage of the melatonin. So many patients come in and they're taking like 5 to 10 milligrams of melatonin, which can actually disrupt your sleep. And you can have a much greater hangover because of the doses. The recommended dose is really in the zero point 0.5 milligrams to 2 milligrams. It's really small. Studies have shown that that's actually the best doses. The half-life of melatonin is about 30 minutes to 2 hours. So it's a very short half-life if you take it in those doses, the zero point 0.5 milligrams to 2 milligrams. What you want to do is get a sustained release melatonin because that will carry over throughout the night. It's not as short, it doesn't have as much of a short half life as the other ones. And so, if you get a longer acting melatonin, a pure melatonin, that would be fantastic. I use REM Fresh because I think it's very well regulated, it's been studied. They've got very small doses as well. I use the 2 milligram. So I don't see an issue with that as long as you take a smaller dose of the melatonin. The issue that I have is with the larger dose. And melatonin is great because it's got oncostatic properties. So they've shown good results with cancer prevention, especially breast and colorectal cancer. Patients are using it for anti-aging properties because it's an antioxidant. If you do get sleep with that, obviously slow wave sleep does help with anti-aging. So I think it really does have some good properties associated with it. I don't recommend it in pregnant or lactating women, and I don't recommend it in children because of their growth cycle, because studies have shown that it can impede that as well. But in adults, I don't think it's terribly a bad medication or a bad hormone to take. It's really for those patients who are taking a higher dose of it. That's the issue that I see because you're getting the hangover effect with that high dose. So high dose doesn't translate into better sleep. It actually translates into worse sleep with a higher dose. Go for the zero point 0.5 to the 2 milligram dose, and I would get a sustained release.
Interesting. The REM Fresh, for example. So there's a couple ways that the FDA has tried to at least put their tentacles a little bit into the naturopathic industry, if you will, right? You have your current good manufacturing practices or your CGMP. That is something that the FDA came up with, which is like sort of the bare minimum for manufacturing a decent type of natural medication like melatonin. And then you have the United States Pharmacopoeia certified or the USP certified. Nature Made would be an example of that. They always tout, hey, we're the USP certified. So is REM Fresh in that category? Do you know? Do they carry any kind of label with them?
There is a label, and I don't know if it's sort of like a good housekeeping label, but as you know, there's no FDA regulation over supplements. But there are certain companies, and I think RemFresh is one of them. I don't know who kind of certifies them. It could be like a good housekeeping, but I found them to be very reputable. It actually, I think, was bought by, if I'm not mistaken, like Nestle in the past year or so. I would have to look that up, but it has been bought by a larger corporation. I trust them. There's certain brands like Gaia that are good as well. So, you have to make sure those brands are good brands. There is a certain website, and I'm kind of blanking out on it, that does look at the different companies and how well reputable they are and sort of the amount of research that goes into it and regulation. So, although it's not regulated by the FDA, there are companies that are reputable and trustworthy. And I think RemFresh is one of them.
Awesome. I'm bringing that up because even though they don't tell you what the brands are, there was that recent article that the ASM highlighted where they talked about the fact that they tried to look at about 30 products, but it sounds like they distilled it down to about 25 products. And only like three of them even had what they said they had within a certain amount. I was like, what are the names of those products? But they leave it very amorphous. They just describe what the products are advertising. So I'm like, okay, but you tested them. Tell us what they are. But they kind of leave. I looked it up in JAMA. I couldn't see. I was like, it's missing something. But it was the best we got. So I'll take it. I wanted to get your opinion on this. With your integrative medicine background, and it's funny that you brought up Andrew Weil because I actually co-wrote a chapter on sleep and cannabis for his integrative medicine textbook that Val was editing. So very small world. The ASM really recommends against the use of melatonin. Do you have an opinion about either why they've definitely taken that statement, especially for insomnia specifically, right? Because melatonin, and your book does go into this, is appropriate for some very specific sleep conditions. But in terms of just the quote, global insomnia piece, do you think there's a reason that they did that? Or, because you're coming from a slightly different perspective. And I think that's important that we think about it in different ways because we're all the same profession.
Yeah, so I don't know if their issue was regarding the dose of the melatonin. I felt like, and I think I read that piece, I don't know if they specifically mentioned the dose, which I agree with. I think the higher dose is not conducive to sleep, and it can actually lead to daytime grogginess or fatigue. So I think one of the issues was really the dose, if I'm not mistaken, in that piece. And also, if it wasn't the dose, I think they're trying to advocate cognitive behavioral therapy instead of relying on medications or even a hormone for sleep. So I think that's kind of the stance that they were taking on it. First of all, stating that cognitive behavioral therapy is the gold standard, which it is. And second, that the dose of the melatonin that most patients are taking is higher than 2 milligrams. It's often 5 or even like 10 or even more. So I think maybe that's the position they were taking. I'm not sure. I would have to kind of read the article again. Did you glean anything from that, if that's kind of where they were going?
Well, truthfully, I wasn't sure you were going to say that you think melatonin's good. I had no idea that you're studying in the integrative medicine field. To hear your response, I was like, "Oh, that's really different than the AASM." I've always sort of been the one who's like, "Well, the AASM says this, so it must be true." But to be honest with you, I've always felt a little wishy-washy about melatonin, except with the high dose. And I'm sure you and I have seen some real crazy stuff out there, 20 milligrams, 30 milligrams sometimes. I'm like, you got to stop that.
I don't see a problem with melatonin actually. Like I said, it's got oncostatic properties, it's an antioxidant. It was initially used for COVID 3 years ago. That was one of the treatment recommendations for it because of its antioxidation properties. I don't see an issue with it. I see an issue if it's taken in higher doses because it can disrupt sleep, but I take it and I sleep very well with it and I have no issues. It's a natural hormone that's produced by the pineal gland. I don't see a downside to it at all. As well as, I mean, I can talk about some of the other supplements because patients may being used to some of these supplements out there, like theanine, which is found in black and green tea, is a great supplement as well.
It's an amino acid, right?
It's an antioxidant. It increases GABA. The one thing that you want to be aware of, it does lower your blood pressure. So it may be good for someone who has high blood pressure. You need to be aware of it if you're on antihypertensive medications for it. So depending on where you are with that, I think theanine is great. Something that most patients don't know is lavender is also a very good anti-anxiety or hypnotic basically. And what lavender does, you can take a capsule, like a lavender capsule, although most people know it as aromatherapy. Studies have shown that it's equivalent to Ativan, the benzodiazepine, for its.
No way.
I want you to look at it because I couldn't believe it either, but it is a very good study that has shown that it has properties like Ativan for its anti-anxiety benefits.
Wow.
Like I said, it's used mainly for aromatherapy, but you can take it in capsule form as well. So try it next time.
I did try it. I tried it because I am an absolutely terrible sleeper. I have shied away from melatonin simply because I have taken the Ollie supplement because it's like it comes in a little gummy and it has some passion flower and some other things. So I have taken that and I feel like intermittently that sort of helped me a bit. But I think for me it was like, well, am I really maybe I'm taking a little bit too high a dose because I think it's like 3 milligrams in there and I'm really kind of supposed to not. It's hard to just like break off half a gummy, like it gets into this like complex, like, what am I getting, as we mentioned. But I tried lavender because Dr. Val had suggested to me. It didn't do anything other than I felt like I burped a lavender scent.
Oh, really? Interesting. Yeah, so it didn't make you.
No, I was not more zen.
Oh, really?
I love lavender aromatherapy, but I'm not gonna lie, I was like, this is like Ativan, not for me. I'll tell you that right now."
People react to different things differently. You may also want to try valerian is great. I know valerian is one of those supplements that initially got a lot of attention, but then kind of fell away. But I do think with valerian, it works very well, but you have to give it time. You have to give it time. It's not one of those things that you take for a few days and you're saying it doesn't work. You have to give it at least 6 weeks, but it's very potent, actually. The one thing you do want to be wary of with valerian is that it's metabolized through the liver. So if you do have any liver issues, you should not be taking that. But it's actually a very great supplement. You just have to give it time. That's the one thing you need to watch out for. The other supplement that I think a lot of women who are premenopausal or postmenopausal will really enjoy is chaste berry. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's very good for regulating the menstrual cycle. It's good for hot flashes. So chaste berry and a lot of OB-GYNs in integrative medicine love it. And I would recommend that if you have issues with hot flashes. Chasteberry is great, as is hops, and hops is used in beer. So hops is also very good for regulating the menstrual cycle, and it's also very good for sleep. There's a lot of different supplements out there that patients may not know about. Chasteberry is great, and hops is very good as well.
And I've mentioned this on a prior episode, but I am a huge fan of Sleepy Time tea. I get the extra strong Sleepy Time, and they have ones that are like vanilla flavored, and I would describe it as not so much that it makes me sleepy, but that I downshift. It allows me to like just downshift so that I can be open
Right.
to the possibility of sleep, is how I look at it.
That's exactly what it is. And as you know, sleep is not like a light switch, it's a dimmer, right? And so that tea is helping you with that whole relaxation process to kind of get yourself ready for sleep. So I agree. It may not really have an effect, but it does have an effect because it's making you prepared for sleep. And if I haven't mentioned this before, Dr. Weil and some of the other integrative specialists really want to emphasize the fact that you should not have any electronics. Make your bedroom a sanctuary, anti-clock, anti-work, anti-anxiety, not being tethered to the clock. And reading a novel is one of the better things that you can do. If you're going to have anything in your bedroom, have a novel because it transports you to a different world. someone's other problems, right? Not your own problems. And studies have shown great benefits with reading a novel before going to bed. Not nonfiction, but fiction.
Like a medical thriller, perhaps?
Medical thriller, yeah. I mean, in some ways, that may be a little too exciting, but yeah, I mean, you're getting yourself embroiled into someone else's problems. So I think a medical thriller is also quite good as long as it's not your own problem.
I'm saying that a little tongue in cheek.
But yeah, a novel is great.
I just wanted to finish up, just in the interest of respecting your time. I wanted to finish up by just talking about like antihistamines, the Benadryls of the world, basically the first generation antihistamines, because it's one of those things where there was a lot of concern about the association between antihistamines and dementia. And what I found particularly interesting was it appeared that yes, histamine receptors are in our brains. And, these first generation antihistamines can go and cross the blood brain barrier. They tend to get there very easily. But it really seems to be like this effect on acetylcholine that might, at least in my brain, might be like the bigger reason that they're more, that we need to exercise caution when using them.
I think you're right. I think there's so many studies out there with regard to histamine, antihistamine receptors, anticholinergics, the antihistamines, as well as the benzodiazepines causing cognitive impairment like Alzheimer's and so forth. Some studies suggest that there's no effect. Some studies suggest that there is significant effect. And for me and you who see patients, it's really difficult for us to kind of reconcile those two, right? Because there's different studies out there. I don't know, have you had a chance to look at the studies that show like not a lot of effect or minimal effect on cognition?
Randomized control trials where they're actually saying, okay, group here has antihistamines, the other group has a placebo or something. So really what we're talking about is more of an association or a relationship that people have established. But I did note the 2015 JAMA article. They had a population of folks from the Adult Changes in Thought program. So it was older folks. It was over 3,000 patients that they followed. They looked at folks that tended to use these first generation antihistamines. Actually, I think for them, they were more anticholinergics in general, like anticholinergics together, which I'm emphasizing Benadryl because a lot of people take that for sleep, and you could also use it for allergies, but there's other anticholinergics just to the folks that are listening that are out there. There's these acetylcholine's a neurotransmitter that basically can affect your memory and your attention. And that's why we're kind of talking about that neurotransmitter and this type of medication. And they did find a pretty strong association with over like years for older patients that they could increase their risk of having some dementia issues. And then there was another study that I saw in 2022, but it was really focused on Taiwan. So, I always am a little reticent when I mention a certain study because if it's just in one particular population, that's a fairly, homogeneous population as opposed to America. So you have to kind of take some of that data with a grain of salt, but they seem to see an association too.
And I think you're completely correct. There's an association. There's no randomized controlled studies for that. I do tend to not want my patients to take antihistamines, probably for those reasons. And it's really not recommended in the field of integrative medicine as well. Because of that association, I would direct patients to some of the other alternatives, like I discussed, like the theanine, the valerian, the lavender, the hops, the chasteberry. There's no significant effects between those that we know of and cognitive impairment. But there is with regard to the antihistamines and the anticholinergics as well. So I think those are the issues right there, the antihistamine and the anticholinergics. So I think you're right. I mean, if I do see a patient that's been taking Benadryl all the time, I'm going to try to wean them off of that and start them on some of these other supplements and botanicals, basically.
And to your point, a lot of times, if a patient's motivated and part of that's the motivation, you won't even need any of this stuff, or so you could use it very intermittently. if you're really dedicated to doing really intensive cognitive behavioral therapy. It is painful, and I always warn my patients that I'm like, this is going to suck and you're probably going to hate me, but I guarantee you we're going to get you better. And it does work.
Yeah, the first 2 weeks, they will hate you, right? Because 'Cause they're getting less sleep and they're feeling more tired. I always tell them, and I don't see some of these patients back because 'cause they're like they've had 2 bad weeks, and they don't realize you have to suffer the bad in order to get the good over the long term. Some people can withstand it, and some people just can't. They give up, and they're like, "Okay, that's it." But you're right. I mean, it's kind of a long process, and you will benefit from it if you give it a chance. So I think you're completely correct.
Well, I just want to thank you so much for your time, Pedram, today.
Sure.
I really feel like I'm going to be in here with a future, celebrity,
Oh, right.
which is awesome. And so I know you're not talking about your specific institution, but forget that. Just read his book. Google him. You want to have an appointment with the guy? You can find him. He's not hard to find on the internet. For me, I just want you to know that I really appreciate anybody who's listening. I'm hoping that some of the information that you hear on this podcast will give you pause and help you improve your sleep, see if it applies to you. Dr. Nevab talked a lot about various different supplements, and I think he did a wonderful job. If you are interested in a sleep consultation with me, I currently work at Oak Health Center. I provide telemedicine consultation. You're free to reach out. You could go to sleep/oak.care and check out the website. And please rate and like us. It's part of the important part of the algorithm. The more people that listen to us, the more people are probably going to be helped. So thank you so much for tuning in. And thank you, Pedram. Really, you're pretty awesome.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I really hate to have to do this, but these are my terms and disclaimer. This podcast is intended for persons 18 years or older. This podcast provides general information and discussion about medicine, health, and related subjects. The words and other content provided in this podcast and in any linked videos and materials are not intended and should not be construed as medical advice. If the listener or any other person has a medical concern, he or she should consult with an appropriately licensed physician or other healthcare worker. The views expressed on this podcast and YouTube channel have no relation to those of any academic hospital practice or other institution with which the authors are affiliated. There is a detailed terms of use agreement. You can see it all on the YouTube channel. In the interest of brevity and the fact that it's legalese and really hard to read, I am not going to read it. But accessing, reading, or otherwise using the podcast or YouTube channel does not create a physician-patient relationship between you and me. Providing personal or medical information to me does not create a physician-patient relationship between you or me or any other contributors to this podcast. Nothing contained in the site is intended to establish a physician-patient relationship, to replace the services of a trained physician or healthcare professional, or otherwise to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. You hereby agree that you shall not make any medical or health-related decision based in whole or in part on anything contained in the site. You should not rely on any of the information contained in the site and related materials in making medical, health-related, or other decisions. You should consult a licensed physician or appropriately credentialed healthcare worker in your community in all matters relating to your health. You agree to indemnify and hold the author harmless from any claim or demand, including attorney's fees, made by any third party as a result of any content posted or made available to you by the site, any violation of law that occurs by you through the site, or anything you do using the site or the content contained therein. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the podcast.